Hi everyone, welcome to Digital Garage. My name is Louisa and today I'll be walking you through how to set up your Google Analytics for success. This is a session that will last for an hour, so we'll definitely try to squeeze it all in, and if we can give you some time back, we'll definitely do that as well. Just a little bit about myself. So as I said, I'm Louisa and I work as a accelerated growth account strategist in the UK market. So what that means is that I help small, medium businesses that are working with Google Ads. Besides that, I'm also a Google Analytics trainer and I have a special expertise in digital marketing, especially the Google Ads suite of products, as I've been working at Google for a couple of years at this point. I would like to take the chance now to introduce you to Emma Gray, which is our moderator for the day. Emma is a Google Digital Garage coach and will interacting with you throughout the day. So she will be answering any of the questions that you might have, so feel free to pop those in the chat. I can't see your view, but it should be on the side there. You can recognize her by her name, and also she'll have a blue spanner next to her name, so you can engage with her with that way. Just a couple of housekeeping points for you today. Obviously, we're all probably in our home setups. Wi-Fi might not be great, especially mine. So if you're having any trouble viewing the webinar right now, please try to refresh this and hopefully it should work a little bit better. If you can't interact with the chat, you would need a YouTube account to do this, but you can quickly set it up in the box on the right. We'll be pausing through the session, so we'll have 2 slots for questions. So feel free to put them in the chat, and Emma will communicate those to me and we can walk through them and as many of them as you can. Also, just to let you know, this session is part of a wider series. You probably might have attended some sessions in the past, but if you haven't heard of them before and this is your first one, feel free to consult the link in the description box below and you'll be able to see all of the roadmap of the different events and feel free to engage with those. If you would like to share your experience with family, friends, colleagues, or anyone that you might think this is relevant to, feel free to share us on social media using the hashtag Digital Garage. We're always really happy to see you also engage with us and see if you enjoyed the session. There's also a feedback form in the description, so we would love to get any insights or how you found this experience, because obviously we fine-tune our program quite often. And if you're all ready to take so many notes for the slides, just so you know, if you fill up the feedback form, you actually will get a link with the PDF to download. So you can sit back, relax, and just enjoy the content. So let's go into the session and see what we'll cover today. So we're going to be covering 3 main areas: how to set up a measurement plan, how to collect events tracking and filters in Google Analytics, and how to set up your goals in Google Analytics. This is just because it will basically be able to allow us to get a full understanding of the setup, but I'll explain to you a little bit more what this section would actually have overall. I guess before we dive into the content, it's good to just, take a step back and ask, why do we use Google Analytics or any of the similar web analysis tools? And what are we trying to achieve with those? Well, if I was sitting in your shoes as a business owner, I'd like to understand what happens on my online store, or what happens on my website, and how are customers engaging with this content. So some of the questions that we might be able to ask is, am I on track with my business? Who is my current audience? How should I improve my website? How should I attract more customers? How should I invest my time or money? So there's definitely a few things that we can get out of this, but obviously this is not exclusive list. There's plenty of questions that we could answer. So moving on, what is the goal of your website? So this is an even further question, right? If you're a e-commerce business, you might want to sell as many of the products as possible. If you are a lead gen business, maybe an insurance company, you would like to get as many quotes as possible. So this really is the starting point that you as a business owner or as part of a business would have to just understand, okay, what is the goal that I'm trying to achieve here? So that then with the data points that we're going to try and collect, we'll be able to understand if we're on the right track or not, and we'll be able to measure that. So let's go into the first section, which is the measurement plan and how we're going to kick this off. So overall, a good step-by-step plan to success, as we would like to say, is create a measurement plan, point number 1. collect data points and just as many insights that we can get. Create goals. So really, how do we measure those? 4, get insights. So the insights is more, how do we understand patterns and trends and like understand this data that we're collecting? And the 5th point would be, how do we take action? So what are the business decisions that we're taking off the back of that? So today we're only going to be focusing on the 3 points, so the setup area of this. But the next 2 will be in the follow-up session, which Emma can actually share the link in the chat, where you can basically sign up if you're interested in learning a little bit more. I highly recommend, I know who the speaker is going to be for it, and he is a brilliant person. He actually trained me multiple times, so I highly recommend signing up because I'm sure you'll get a lot out of that session. So a measurement plan for a customer journey is identifying a quote marketing funnel, right? In marketing, in the school of thought of marketing, there are various different names to address how a customer might go through that journey. But if we look at, I guess, the Google framework would be see, think, do, care. So that would mean, and you can put yourself in the shoes of a user yourself, not necessarily in the shoes of a business. And you can ask yourself, okay, well, if I'm interested in buying a oven, for example, I might go on multiple web pages and I would become aware of the multiple brands, right? Then maybe I actually just got my paycheck and I'm ready to buy a oven, and I might be moving down the funnel in the consideration stage. So, maybe looking, well, does that oven have all the settings? What's the price point of that one? And just trying to understand which one works best for you. Then after some research, when you made your decision, you're right, all right, I'm good to buy. And at that point, you're in the do. So you're in the finalizing moment when you're actually going to purchase that. But then what's the care? So the care is re-engaging with that brand. So potentially I bought that oven and it worked brilliantly for me. So happy, love the service, really good business. I might need a dishwasher next and they sell all kitchen appliances. Why not go back to that business? So we need to make sure that that's on track. So how do you identify points for your own business? Well, this is a template that you can actually feel free to fill this up. So, what does my customer want to achieve? What do I want to achieve with them on my website? What content might be worth having? How do we show this message and what will we measure? And it's important that we do that each step of that marketing funnel, because each user at every step of that marketing funnel will be different and will have different priorities, and different KPIs would show success at any different stage. So this is just an example that we filled up for you. This might actually resonate for some of you, potentially, if the business model aligns with the examples that we put here, but honestly, the sky is the limit. As I said, if you fill up the feedback form, you'll get access to the slides, but also this webinar is going to be live on the live stream for 24 hours after this. So if you miss it, you can always rewatch it and just take down some notes. And fill up your own template, which would be extremely useful. So how then do we collect data? Before we get into that, it's also good to understand what data is and what we do with it. Like, data as a standalone numerical figure means absolutely nothing to us. Especially if we compare ourselves with competitors, it might not mean that much, right? If we say that we had 10,000 visitors one day, well, without much context, is that good? If the previous day you had 100,000 visitors, then that's definitely bad. If the previous day you had 100 visitors, then that's definitely good. Or for example, let's say you had 10,000 visitors one month and 20,000 visitors the second month. And then we add a different layer on top, which is, in the previous month, we had 200 signups with those 10,000 visitors. But in the second month, we had 20,000 visitors and 100 signups. Well, then that shows an increase in awareness, but a decrease in performance. So what does that tell us? So collecting data is not necessarily the numbers that tells us much, but it's really how do we analyze it? But obviously without those, we wouldn't be able to make any decisions. So let's get into it and see how we can get started with that. So there's 4 systems that make up Google Analytics: the collection part, the configuration, the processing, and the reporting. So we're going to start with the collection first, and tell you a little bit more around how you can actually get some practical tips to put in. So whether you have a Google Analytics account or whether you don't have a Google Analytics account, a good way to get started is definitely to make sure there's right tracking on your webpage. So the right tracking, you can actually find it already made into the Google Analytics account for yourself. And what the tracking, I guess, that you would need is a global site tag. Very fancy word, but I explain what that is. A global site tag is a little snippet of code that you would put in the headline of your website that would trigger every single time a user goes on a page, and it would call that a hit. So that is really, really important because it would collectively get us a really good idea of, I guess, every single step that a user might have on the web page. So to give you a practical, I guess, advice here, how you find that is going in the cog in the bottom left, which is the admin cog, going under property, which is like the screenshot that you see there, tracking code, and that piece of code will be self-generated already for you. There's a step-by-step guide that Emma can send in the chat with the link, but if you are comfortable in doing it yourself, it actually is quite easy. But if you don't feel comfortable with yourself and you don't want to crash your website, any website developer will be really able to do that. It's a very, very easy skill. We actually do also have a free demo Google Analytics website as well that we probably can share with you as well. I've used it for myself at the very beginning of Google. So it's an externally accessible view, probably useful just for people that maybe don't have a Google Analytics account already, just to get a bit familiar with what it clicks like and like the interface. But we highly recommend just setting one up as well. It's very, very easy. Also, it has some integrations with Shopify as well and some other platforms. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a website built on one of those platforms, the code might be different. It just really applies all across the board. If you have inherited the website from someone and you might not sure if there's a Google Analytics on it already and you just not sure where to ask, well, this extension is going to be your best friend. It's available on Google Chrome. It's called the Tag Assistant. I actually use it all the time. You can put it on there. You would press enable once you download it. So just like it shows here, then you reload the page and it would pop up with something like this. So it would show you UA, which is usually the very beginning of a Google Analytics code, and then the code there. So obviously you would be able to enter a Google Analytics with that code. Obviously you would need the password and the access, but at least you would be able to know that that's there. If that's there and you've inherited the website, as I just said, and you have no idea how to get back, if you go to Google support, you probably would be able, with some credentials, to show that you're the right person to access that Google Analytics. So there's no fear, you'll be able to access this at some point. So as I just said, every single interaction that a user would have with the page of your website, no matter how long they spend on the website, or no matter how many pages they would look, it would look like a hit. So every single web page that I would go on to, it's a hit. But maybe some of you may be asking, well, what if the same user goes on multiple pages and spends hours on my web page? Is that going to look like many different users and maybe give me data points that are actually not correct? So that's a brilliant question. And the reason why that's something that you shouldn't worry about is because an aggregation of multiple hits is actually understood as a session. So a session is the same user doing multiple actions on your web page, and every single one would be a hit. But a good way to understand the session is, unless there's a 30-minute break between the multiple activities, that would be counted as a session. But if, say, I'm looking up shoes and I'm on the same web page and I'm just clicking, and then I don't engage with it for 30 minutes and then I do again, that would be 2 sessions. So it gives plenty of time between the two to understand the engaged activity that a user has on your web page. So I hope this is all clear, but if there's any terminology that's a bit confusing, definitely pop it into the chat and Emma will be able to send you links, or we'll be able to cover that in the break that's shortly coming up. So now we move on to event tracking and filters. So we have all this, I guess, data points now around how many people visited the website and how much time maybe they spent on it, for example, but that just really doesn't tell us that much. So going back to the example of, 10,000 visitors 1 month, 20,000 visitors 1 month, but what are they doing there? Maybe, as I just said before, if they did 200 signups the previous month and 100 signups the second month, maybe we wouldn't have known that much. So events is actually what really makes us understand the actions that people do on our websites. And filters is just another piece to understand how the data comes through. So we'll go into it now so we make sure that that makes a little bit more sense. So looking at the second piece, so configuration and processing, this is where we would be talking about events and filters for your account. If you set up this correctly and you take some time to think really about what makes sense for your business, this will really make you have a giant leap in your Google Analytics activity and the benefits that you can get really out of it. So let's look at events tracking first. So an event is, I guess we use events to, as it says here, to collect and interact with your content. So a user could do many different things. They could submit a form, they could watch a video, they could interact with the chat box, they could submit a form. There's plenty things that we could do, but if we don't set them up, obviously we won't be able to see this. So let's look into this slide, which I think gives a better understanding of what we're talking about. So the demo account that I mentioned before is of the Google merchandise shop or something like that. So it gives you analysis of what we're tracking for that. And one would be the announced e-commerce. So that would be more of a goal that we'll talk about later on. And contact us would potentially be the contact form, or maybe if they've clicked on the dynamic phone number or any of the sorts. But again, there's no limited list. There's plenty of things that you could track, and obviously that depends on the website that you might have. So for example, forms, buttons, videos, outgoing link, errors, contact forms, anything that you might find, I guess that would work. So I would encourage you to maybe just think about right now in 30 seconds, what would be something that I'd love to track, and just put it in the chat, and obviously I could check afterwards and see if there's any more that maybe I've never think about, which is always really interesting, as websites are very different for so many businesses. So let's move on. Yeah, event tracking does not happen manually, automatically. We have to set it up manually. So there are some implementations that we would have to do to track that. It's I guess I like to use an analogy, which is like using a highlighter for someone in a shop. So if someone, for example, comes into your physical shop and picks up a mug or a plate or anything, and then actually puts them back down and leaves, that is basically like if they've abandoned the cart, right? So what if you had the power to just highlight a person and be like, okay, he picked up a mug and he picked up a bowl, she picked up, I don't know, a grill, but they left. When they come back, you would know, for example, that these people were previous cart abandoners, for example. So maybe they're re-engaging with your business. So that's kind of a bit of a small analogy to give you a bit of an understanding of what maybe tracking events would be able to help you. So for example, why so many people came into my shop, picked things up and then left? Was the price point off? Was there an issue with the payment? Were we not taking card that week? Any of those issues might actually be understood off the back of understanding how data has changed at different times for your physical shop, but actually for your online shop, equally as easy. So just a couple points that you would have to do. So you need to decide what interactions you want to track. Obviously, that's the first point. You need to decide how you want to organize these events into categories, actions, and labels. And we'll walk through that a little bit more in a second. And then work with your web or app development to set this up. So that can come into a form of additional code onto your web page that you might need additional assistance with if you don't have the skills yourself. So how to do this, there's multiple ways that you could place the code for event tracking. You could use a tag management system. Google Tag Manager is one that I would recommend, for example. It's quite easy. You build it into the website, and then from the tag manager, you can actually create more tags. I'm personally not a big expert because I'm not a developer or so on. So maybe I would always encourage using the advice of a developer, but always up to you what you feel comfortable doing. You could use a plugin for open source websites, or you can use AutoTrack plugin. So again, it's written there in red, not out of style for the slides, but also because it's important. Work with your web app developer to implement those events, and I'm sure it'll be quite smooth setup. So filters. Filters is a second way to understand data, not necessarily actions, but more the entire aggregation of the insights that might be coming through. So, for example, you will have a raw data, which is actually always very important to keep, and then a master view. This is just kind of like two examples, but we'll tell you a little bit more about examples. So a view or reporting view is a subset of analytics account property where you can have its own unique configuration settings. So you can create multiple views for a single property or configure each view to show different subset of data. Very, very fancy words, but we'll break it down. So for example, let's say if you have an unfiltered view, this is one that probably you would need because it's good to have backup. That means that like if the view, say something happens with your website, you change the code, you update it, having the unique unfiltered view makes sure that all the past data just doesn't get ruined and it's there. Just to give you some examples, because I think that would make it a little bit more clear for all of us here. So you could use filters, for example, to exclude data. And this is a very, very common one. So let's say you're a big company and you have 200 employees and you're an e-commerce business. You want to exclude the IP address of the company, for example, because if all of your 200 employees were looking up your website every single day, you would come up with a lot of sessions from the business that you have. So obviously that might not be that great because that would skew the data a little bit, right? So that's one that's very, very common. I see it quite often with e-commerce businesses, but really any single business. And that's really easy as like excluding your IP address. The second point would be including filters, and that is basically the reverse logic, right? So when you apply an include filter, the hit is thrown away. And basically, if it's not the same one as the one that you want to include, it would basically just like take it off. So that's the only reason why. So you can include from data from your host name specifically, so you could see maybe what specific IP addresses are doing per se on that, or you could do just one specific location. So for example, going back to the e-commerce businesses, if you have, you know, an UK shop, an Irish shop, a German shop, you could see then just specific by that. And then the third point would be modify data. So for example, you would go maybe google.com or www.google.com. So how does that go always to the same domain? You could basically create that. So you can consolidate page views basically in different ways that people could like type them up if they're coming directly to your website. And that will basically give you the modified view as well. When you use filters. So quite important. But if you're asking, where do I find this? We can see it there. So the admin panel is always going to be your best friend. It's always going to direct you to everything in the Google Analytics page, and filters will be there. So admin on the bottom left, it always looks like a little cog. The tracking data, for example, info is there just in the middle, where I basically showed you the original code where it's there. And then the view, under each view, you can have the filters, the goals, and so on and so forth. So again, always check with the developer kind of what makes sense, because you don't want to add too many filters if it's not useful. But the one that I would highly recommend is the exclude data, which is from your employees, because at least it gives you fully external data that's coming from customers or visitors or prospects. So let's look at data views. So in this structure, just to give you a bit of an idea of the three columns as well, an account will be your overall website. The property, though, could be, well, an account actually could have multiple properties. So if you have multiple websites under the same company, you could have different properties as website. And under views, you can actually have everything that I said. So for example, if you want to have a UK view, or I don't know, the German view, as I said before, that would be in the view section. In the property, it could be, for example, let's think of a company that has multiple brands. Let's say Coca-Cola, and they've got also, what is it, 7-Up or something like that. Maybe I'm saying something that's completely wrong, but you could have, you know, the company account, and then you could have the website for Nike, not Nike, the website for Coke, the website for 7-Up, Fanta, so on and so forth. for example. So hopefully that makes sense. I know there's not many questions right now in the chat, but we now are at a pause for any specific questions that might come up. I know we've already covered quite a bit, and maybe we speed up a little bit at times. So want to take a bit of a breather to see if there's any specific questions that you'd like to ask. If not, we can always go up and move to the next section. So I'll give it a second for Emma to let me know. Okay, perfect. So there's no specific questions. Taking that as a good sign that maybe you fully understood everything that we chatted about. So thumbs up for that. And let's go ahead. So setting up your goals in Google Analytics. I think this is the most exciting part because obviously it gives us all the juicy details around what people are doing. So we'll explain a little bit here as well, the difference between events and goals and what it means. The reason why we chatted about events before, it was just to give you an idea that like we can track actions of people, but goals would kind of encompass events as well, but we just want to make a bit of a difference there. So we'll chat about this. So for every single business, there's going to be different types of actions that we might want to track about. So obviously, if you're an e-commerce business, as I mentioned multiple times, you want to track their purchases. If you are a finance company or, I don't know, a travel company, you might want to track the leads that are coming through. If you are any of the above, you could have signups maybe for newsletters. If you are a conference or a university, an online educational platform, you might want to track the downloads of the brochures or the prospects, or if you are showing a lot of content on your webpage that might be educational or any of the sorts, you might want to track a video view. So it can be very, very different things. But highly recommend, again, always just understanding what makes sense for my business, and maybe even just a very blunt question: what makes me money? That's always like a good one to start from, and then build from that. So there's a difference between macro and micro conversions. So micro conversions could be, all the little bits, and usually events tends to be in the micro conversion. So viewed or shared something, read more, like clicked on the read more in an article, or for example, again, engage with some of the web pages that we've had. But macro conversions are more the meaty things, which potentially would be goals. So that's how I personally like to distinguish the two. So how do you set up goals? Still quite easy as well. It's going back to the admin cog that I always mention, then going to the view column. So now we're familiar with the third column, there'd be goals, and in there you can select a few. So just to give you a bit of a difference here. So there's a few, as you could see, and I guess the example addition makes it really easy for us to understand. So URL destination, that could be a thank you page, or like a purchase page, something like that. Duration, if they spent much time on the web page. Page views, so for example, you can create a goal for really high engaged users. So for example, if you had viewed 3 or more pages or so on. An event, so as I was mentioning before, the more micro conversion, what they've engaged with on the web page, and then a smart goal that we'll talk about later. In terms of what I find most important, destination and events would probably be the most important ones. Destinations can be the purchases, the leads, and so on. When it comes to adding a value to that, that would be e-commerce tracking, something slightly different that we're not covering in this session per se, but always recommend going to the Google Analytics Help Center to get a little bit more information about all these little nuggets that we're discussing today. So destination is actually quite easy. And we're going to talk about it like this right now. And let's just go to the next slide to give you a bit of a visual of what it looks like. This is something that I actually set up myself for some of my customers. You don't really need a developer to cover this really. If you have a unique URL identifier at the end of a page. So for example, this one here, contact form / success, which is what pops up at the end of someone submitting a form. You can easily just put that URL in. And the really nice thing is that at the bottom there, you can see verify this goal. If you click on the verify this goal, it would actually tell you how many of those you would have had in the last 7 days based on the performance of the web page, and it gives you an idea whether that's working or not. So that's really brilliant. So if you have those URLs that are quite well defined, you can go ahead and do that yourself. If your URL, for example, doesn't update, which in some cases it would happen, then you would need your developer and use, for example, Google Tag Manager, as I mentioned at the beginning, to get the snippet in the back end of the web page. So that's just a little bit of the difference here. So where you can find your URL pages, you can play around with your web page. And for example, one thing that I do is I get a form, for example, and I put name test, surname test, email test, phone number 00000. And I usually do that for my customers just to figure out the URLs. But if not, a much easier way would be to go on the left panel of the analytics. You'll have some major 5 tabs. One of them is behavior, and if you click on site content or pages, you'll be able to see all of the / endings, and you can see which are the best ones that might make more sense for your destination URL tracking. And so, for example, here, registration success, so order completed, and you'll be able to just put that into the URL and create that. So, for example, if we picked order completed, you could be able to put / order completed .html, verify this goal. Always recommend doing that, and then save. And then here you'll be all set to start tracking. Some other event tracking. So basically, as I was mentioned before, just give you a bit of an idea of some things that you could do here. So this is what the interface would look like. And you would have, for example, a category, an action, and a label. And we'll tell you in a second where to find the categories, actions, and labels. So you have equal to, for example, contact us, equal to on-site click, equal to email, and you'll be able to track how many people have maybe clicked on the email and then maybe have gone to their Gmail or any other provider and just sent you an email from there. So it might not quantify specifically, but if it's an outbound thing, it's always best to do an event tracking, for example. So where you would monitor those once you created them, you'd be able to go still under behavior. There's an events tab, and you'll be able to see top events. So here, for example, we have the contact us, which would be an event, which is there. And we'll be able to see, okay, how many on-site clicks, how many were emails, how many were phone calls, and check that. So that's really, really easy to do. So event tracking, as it says here, should be actively measuring events for this type of goal. So you can always just redo this setup, for example, for click on email. If you have a dynamic click, or for example, your phone number. If, for example, you have a phone number on your website, what it usually does, it doesn't really just call from the website, right? It just redirects maybe to a call assistant maybe on your Gmail, or if you have, a MacBook, for example, it might open up FaceTime, for example. So that's why event tracking would be quite handy in this specific instance. So moving on, the following 3 here that we saw at the beginning, but we didn't really delve too much in, is potentially because, going back to the question, okay, what is really bringing money in the bank, might not necessarily be so correlated to this. So those could be a bit more micro conversions to some extent as part of that little bucket there. So duration, you can easily make some events there goals there for how much time people have spent on the web page, and pages and screens per session. So back to the names that we had at the beginning. A session is a collective of hits with one user that hasn't interrupted for 30 minutes. So how many pages have they looked on different screens of your web page during the same session? And SMART goal, it's a bit of a different one. That SMART goal has some criteria that you need to fulfill. So it's one that you could use for your Google Ads account to optimize your ads towards. There's a few criteria there. So for example, you need to have 500 analytics sessions over the past 30 days. It needs to also have less than, I think, 10 million views on the webpage over 30 days. So it's a bit dynamic as well. So also if you drop below the 500 sessions on a monthly basis, actually is going to be grayed out like that. But what it basically does is it aggregates the best sessions of users. So which ones had, either the most amount of time on the webpage or most screens on the webpage. So it's a bit of an aggregated one. Personally, I wouldn't use it too much myself because it just tells me about engagement, but doesn't tell me too much about actions. But that's always a good one as well if you didn't know what to start with and you had some good activity on your webpage already. There's more info actually in a support webpage as well that I can have Emma put into the chat, so you can keep it open as a tab and read a bit about it afterwards as well. So just to look at the interface and how it would look like for yourself, if you want to set up any of those, you would have duration. So you could put how many minutes or hours or seconds and click that. Page per sessions, you could have basically how many screens you would want to put in there. So it's a drop down and then you just pick that and greater than, less than. You can just make a lot of this. Also, you can always assign a value to that. So let's say if you made up some math and you had somewhat of a lifetime value for a customer that usually spends more than, I don't know, an hour on your webpage, you can always assign a value. Personally, maybe don't recommend it too much because it would get mixed into the purchases, for example, but that's also an option that you could do. The verify the goal, always there for you to understand, am I doing this correctly? Does that make sense with the amount of traffic I had in the previous week? And then the smart goal, which I was saying, it's kind of like an aggregated of the most engaged sessions that have happened on your webpage in the last 30 days. I guess the pro of it is extremely easy to set up. As you can see there, I don't think you would need help with a developer on this one, or at least I hope myself wouldn't need that. But the con is it doesn't give you too much control really on what, not even just the actual engagement, but also just what really makes too much sense for the business. So if we all strip it back and we go back to purchases, maybe cart abandoners, lead submissions, those are the things that are a little bit more juicy, but always you might have your own reasons to understand and track whatever it is, if it gives you more insights moving forward. And hopefully the next session with the secret speaker, but very, very knowledgeable on Google Analytics, will give you all the tips and tricks to analyze this data. So we've actually speed quite through it. So we have plenty of time for additional questions if there are any. If not, Emma also has some links to refer to those, but I'll give you again another 30 seconds to put in some questions if you do have. If you don't have, we can move and talk about what the next steps are for yourself, and you can make some notes about those. Okay, cool. So Perry, there's no more questions, which means that you've fully understood everything that we chatted about. So again, another good sign. Also, I'd like to thank myself. So let's talk about next steps. So we definitely covered a lot of information, some of it a little bit more technical as well. So hopefully it was all quite clear, and in the feedback form, we'd love to understand if this was the right content as well. So again, a little plug-in as well for feedback. At Google, we love feedback. So if you could take 30 seconds to do that, also really appreciated. This is the worksheet for the measurement plan again. You can, again, either re-come to this in the next 24 hours as the video and the live stream will remain live. If not, if you fill up the feedback form, you'll be able to download all of the slides that we just presented today. in a PDF format. A couple of very useful links for you to mention. I mentioned some of them throughout the presentation, but ones that I would check is the Help Center for Google Analytics, Google Analytics Academy, which is an actual online test as well that you could do and follow in your own time, and then the YouTube for Google Analytics as well. So I'll have Emma pop all of those into the chat. Feel free to bookmark them or just save them in your own learning digital skills folder, and I'm sure that you'll find them really, really useful. So would love to stress this one a little bit again. If you might need any help with event tracking and all of that as well, you'll find all of this in the Help Center. But if you, again, go back to a developer, I'm sure they'll be really, really well equipped to do any of the steps that we mentioned today. The session was more to really have us think about what makes sense for ourselves as business owners or part of businesses to track and use, and how do we bring, for example, business online, or how do we maximize our use of Google Analytics as a platform, not necessarily just to go and implement the tags ourselves, but just to give you all the tools available that we have and share those with you. So a couple of action points moving forward. Think about your business goals, as I just said. Good to reflect and potentially use the worksheet. I think that really forces you to think, okay, for brand new customers in the awareness phase, what do we want to make sure that we have on our webpage, for example? Or, the persons that buy from us 12 times a year, what do they want to see? And that always helps you understand some business decisions as well, and also marketing decisions. So really, really good stuff. The second point would be create your measurement plan. So as I said there, using the worksheet and filling this up, it basically leads to that. The third point would be talk to your web developer or yourself and use any of these solutions that we discussed during this session. The fourth one would be create goals based on the measurement plan. So, for example, the KPIs section can really be matched to a goal. So back to the example of, someone in the awareness consideration, do we maybe want to have an event of have they viewed our intro video on the homepage, or a goal of did they sign up to our newsletter, but maybe to our converters, have they actually purchased, and do we have the value of that conversion? Any different goal would make sense to map it up to the measurement plan. And then the follow-up would be come back to really understand how to get insights from all of those data points that we discussed today. Again, highly, highly, highly recommend the next speaker. Definitely has plenty of knowledge, and he'll be able to share a lot of that with you as well. So on a final note, continue learning online. We have plenty of resources, and we really, really hope that those are useful for you. We have all of those links here. So the Learn Online for Digital Garage, you can have all of that, but also you can also book yourself to the next webinar on that link. So I'll leave those up for 10 seconds just in case you want to write those down. But again, if you get the feedback form, you'll get all the slides again. I probably said this 10 times. So hopefully you'll get that done as well. And thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure not seeing you, but hopefully interacting with you in somewhat of a digital way as we're trying to get used to, all of us really, during this challenging time. Thank you so much for also taking the time out of your mornings to pay attention to me and talk to you about Google Analytics. Really hope it was useful. And would love to see any of your posts going around LinkedIn, any of those platforms on Digital Garage. Thank you so much, and have a lovely hump day, I guess, as it's Wednesday, and the rest of the week. Goodbye.